Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January edition of the Staff Wellness and Health Booster Sessions. We are excited to present today's session on computer workstation ergonomics. My name is Chad Saxon with Shared Health, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. So as we know, the events of the past few years have greatly changed the way we work in many different ways. This includes increased time spent working on computers and the environment in which we work, whether it's hybrid and or working from home. Today's session will review computer workstation ergonomic principles and strategies, to reduce the risk of musculoskeletal injury and overall wellness. Additional resources and checklists will also be discussed. So our presenter today is Sylvia Horvath. Sylvia is a member of the WRHA's Occupational and Environmental Safety and Health Department. As a musculoskeletal injury prevention specialist, Sylvia assists in the development and maintenance of an injury prevention programs for employees within the WRHA. This includes ergonomic assessments for computer workstations, patient handling, and manual materials handling. Before we get to Sylvia's presentation, I'll just note that after she's done with today's presentation, we'll have a few moments for questions. So if anything does come to mind while the presentation is ongoing, please enter them into the questions section on the GoToWebinar platform. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be made available as a streaming video on demand on Shared Health Providers page under the Mental Health and Addiction section. And I also placed a link to that in the chat section. So if you look in the chat, that's the page where you'll find the recording if you wanted to review again. And you can bookmark that for future information on upcoming sessions. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sylvia, and we'll be back in a little while for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad, for the introduction, and thank you all who were able to make it today. I know everybody's very busy these days, so I appreciate your interest in this presentation. So as Chad mentioned, we're going to be talking about computer workstation ergonomics, and I'll start by just giving you an idea of what exactly we mean by ergonomics in the first place. So really, when we talk about ergonomics, what we're really talking about is how do we design our furniture, our tools, any sort of equipment? How do we arrange those? How do we design those to sort of best fit the physical capabilities of the individual? How to best how to sort of optimize efficiency and making sure that we're working most comfortably. Now, in saying that as well, an important piece of injury prevention, while I will be talking a lot about ergonomics as well, a really important part of injury prevention as well is in terms of our own work practices and what we can do to try and minimize those injuries as well. So I will be also discussing a lot of content on that as well closer to the end. Okay, so as far as objectives, what I'd like to be able to cover today is I want everybody to be able to recognize what signs and symptoms of a musculoskeletal injury are. Sometimes these tend to be ignored and sometimes we don't necessarily know what they are. And so it's important to sort of know what the signs and symptoms are so that you can recognize them. I also want to basically go through what are the ergonomic hazards or risks when it comes to doing computer work. Many of you are working from home as well now and are using the computer more. And so I'm going to try and give you options for both, ideal sort of office environments, but also strategies that you can implement in your home environment as well when you may not have all the equipment at your disposal. And finally, I will at the end too, because it's becoming more and more important about the psychological and psychosocial sort of impacts and as it relates to musculoskeletal prevention. And so I'm just going to touch on that at the end as well. And finally too, we'll be talking a lot, and that's where the bulk of the presentation will be about, is about how do we try and eliminate or reduce any of the musculoskeletal risks that occur while we do our computer work. Okay, so we're going to start off by just defining what a musculoskeletal injury is. Not everybody necessarily knows what it is, but basically it's soft tissue damage or aggravation in the musculoskeletal system which is caused when demands exceed the physical tolerance of connective or other related soft tissues. So that will include muscles, tendons, ligaments, nerves, discs, and joints. Damage can result from a single event, but even more commonly can develop also over time as well. And more simply put, or something that might be a little bit more familiar to you, is a musculoskeletal injury is really sort of discomfort or pain from sprains and strains. Those are your main sort of diagnoses. I'll also add that musculoskeletal injuries are one of the most common types of injuries on the job, and about 2/3 of them are often related to either a poor workplace design or body mechanics, or how we use or move our body. And the main areas that we see, particularly when it comes to computer work, the main areas of our body that we see MSI occur in mainly are the neck, shoulder, back, and then wrist and hand. So in terms of signs and symptoms, what you want to look for, the main symptom is going to be pain and discomfort, but there are other symptoms that you want to look for as well. You may experience numbness or tingling or a burning sensation in parts of your body. You may also have swelling or redness. You may notice that you have decreased range of motion, or you're not able to move as well in a joint or throughout your body. You may also notice that you start feeling weak, or you're feeling fatigued as you're working. And it's really important to recognize these symptoms, particularly at the early stages. I think often with MSI injuries, we kind of wait a little bit too long, and we wait till sometimes the middle or later stages of an injury when treatment is less effective. And I mean, treatment, we can still absolutely do treatment, but where it's going to be most effective and where we can really try and minimize the impact is recognizing it in its early stages. And so in that early stage, you've got signs and symptoms while you're performing a certain task, or when you're at work, but they disappear when you finish that task. Okay, so you're okay once you stop doing that task. But as you get into the middle stages of the injury, your signs and symptoms continue even after you've finished that task that is causing you discomfort. You may get more signs and symptoms that may now not disappear with rest, once again. And you're going to find that your work might get more affected, and not just your work, but also your personal life might also get more affected. In the later stages of an injury, signs and symptoms are present at most of the time, and I think the key feature here is that symptoms aren't resolved with resting, okay? And you might even find that not only work and your personal life, your day-to-day personal life is being affected, but also your sleep may be disrupted. So once again, the take-home point on this is recognizing those early signs and symptoms of an MSI injury so that we can try and nip it in the bud from the beginning. Okay, so what are some of the ergonomic risk factors that contribute to basically an MSI injury? There's many different types of ergonomic risk factors. I'm going to focus on three main ones that I think are most relevant to computer workstations, and that's awkward or sustained postures, repetitive motions, and contact stress. Now, forceful exertion is also a major MSI risk factor, and we may find that there's some forceful exertions when it comes to typing or using the mouse, depending on what type of a keyboard or how hard you hit the keys or how long you're doing it for. But generally speaking, I would say that it's the awkward or sustained postures, the repetitive motions, and the contact stress of that are probably going to be your primary contributing factors when it comes to computer workstations. So we're just going to take a quick look at each one of these just a little bit, and then I'm going to get into what we do about it. All right, so awkward postures basically are any postures that go away from what we would consider a neutral posture. On the left-hand side of the slide there, you see a neutral spinal alignment or posture. So our spine has natural curves in it. And so anytime we go away from those natural curves of the spine or natural sort of resting positions of a joint, um, those would be considered awkward. And of course, the more further away they are from a neutral position or a resting position, the more impact it might have. Now, keeping in mind that our bodies are designed to move, right? So really when it becomes concerning is when it's sustained or repetitive, right? And some examples of some awkward postures you're going to see on the right, in particular that spine on the right hand side. That is a typical posture that we might see when somebody is sitting with their pelvis rotated back, and you'll notice that that low back lumbar curvature has actually been reversed from what is normal. Okay, and then on the right hand side, just some further examples of some awkward postures specifically of the spine. And the big thing here is that our muscles, our ligaments, there's going to be increased activity because our muscles basically are strongest in their mid-range position. And so we're basically asking our muscles to work in either a lengthened or shortened position. There's more force involved there. They're going to be more likely to fatigue. There's just more stress overall placed on all of the musculoskeletal structures. Okay, and of course, if you add any other risk factor like force or sustaining those postures, that's when it becomes really significant. Okay, so for sustained postures, when we hold a position for too long, it's like without movement, basically, we have what's considered static effort. So our muscles are still working, so there's continual muscle contraction. Okay, but there's a reduced blood flow because the blood vessels are getting compressed. There's no movement or muscle pump happening. So we have a mismatch between the blood flow and hence the oxygen coming to the working muscles. And so there's a mismatch between the blood that's needed and the blood that's being provided. And that basically will lead to muscular fatigue, cramps, pain, a lot more sooner than dynamic work when you're moving. Okay, repetition. Now there's not really a regulation or a regulated standard on this or a universal definition, but what we can say is that repetition can be considered when you're doing the same motion, the same body part with little chance of recovery time. That's basically repetition. So we're looking at high frequency. And the problem with this is that you get an accumulation of small amounts of tissue damage over time. And just like awkward postures, really what we're most concerned about is when you're coupling it with a static or an awkward posture or a forceful exertion on top of that. That really is the critical factor in terms of your risk of musculoskeletal injury. Okay, the final risk factor that I'm going to talk about here is contact stress, and that is simply when your skin or your body part comes into contact with a sharp object. The problem here is that there's force concentrated on a small area of the body. It pinches or crushes the tissue and the blood vessels, and that's going to cause discomfort and often pain. So this is something we also commonly see in workstations. I just want to focus a little bit on laptop computers here in terms of risks, and then we're going to get into what do we do about all of this. Laptops is inherently by their design, it is difficult to have a good sort of ergonomic setup with it. And that's because the screen is attached to your keyboard. So when you try and adjust your screen to the right height for your head and neck alignment, then it basically puts your arms, shoulders, elbows, wrists, and fingers out of alignment and vice versa. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see that it's not in a terrible position for your arms, but the tendency there is to push the laptop forward. You get that hunched forward posture. You've got some contact stress happening through the forearm there, and you've got a lot of neck flexion as you look down on the screen. But conversely, if you raise the screen up, as is on the right-hand side, then what you'll notice is that you're reaching for your keyboard. You've got elbow extension, you've got shoulder flexion, and then you really, in this particular instance as well, you don't have any support for the upper extremity. And so it really is a dilemma for laptop computers if you're going to be working on them exclusively. So it is okay for a short period of time. Generally, we say less than an hour is okay, or less than 30% of the time is a general rule. But if you're working off your laptop computer for most of the day, you really should be trying to improve that workstation setup. Okay, so how do we reduce these MSI risk factors? All right, so in front of you, there is a general picture of some overall ergonomic setup. Okay, so I'm going to start on the left-hand side there. So basically, not surprisingly, you want your back to be straight. And what we mean by back straight is, again, maintaining those neutral spinal curvatures, in particular in the low back. We find that curvature is reversed. So you want your back straight. You want your elbows close to your body, not far away from your body, at approximately a 90-degree to 120-degree angle. So in that picture, what you see there is at approximately 90 degrees. You want that backrest supporting your lower back. So you want good lumbar support, supporting that natural inward curvature. And what I would say is that in this particular picture, this person is quite upright, but there is a lot of evidence to show actually that a slight reclined posture is actually beneficial and preferable, because that's where the chair really starts to work for you, and that's where your muscles have the least amount of activity and you can relax your body. If you look at the bottom front of the chair, you want the front of the seat pan. You don't want that pressing on the backs of your knees. And if your feet aren't flat on the ground, you want to basically be using a footrest, because if you don't, the tendency will be just to slide your bum forward in the chair. You won't be sitting well. You're going to slide your bum forward in the chair because your body's going to want that foot support somewhere. And then in terms of the monitor, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but you want your monitor distance about roughly arm's length away, and the top of the monitor should be level or just below with eye level. Okay, and then at the top there, you see you also want to try and maintain your wrists as straight as possible. Okay, so the height of your work surface becomes important, right? So you want to make sure that your chair is at the right height. Now, in saying that, if you do have an adjustable office chair, and that is preferable, especially depending on how much computer work you're doing, but if you are at the computer for long periods of time, it is a good idea to have an adjustable chair. And as we were mentioning earlier, you want the backrest height, the lumbar support, to make sure that that lumbar support is at approximately waistline, or what we say is above the belt line. This is really important. One of the things that we often see when we do ergonomic assessments is that that backrest height is all the way down to the chair. And so that inward curvature that chairs often have is not supporting you in the right spot on your low back. So it's really important to raise that backrest height up so that that inward curvature is in the right position. You also want your backrest angle. We talked about that. It can be upright, but even more preferable, slightly reclined back, because again, that's when the chair is going to start helping support your body. Your seat depth, we talked about. You want to maintain a little bit of distance between the back of the knees and the front edge of the seat, and that's because you've got a lot of nerves and vessels right in behind the knee. And so if the chair is pressing against that, that is another reason why we might slide our body forward in the chair just to relieve that pressure without even thinking about it. Your armrest, you basically want slightly lower than your elbow, or at about elbow height, so that it supports the weight of your upper body with your elbows at a 90-degree angle. And that really is important to try and reduce sort of shoulder, neck tension, because our bodies will try and find support for the upper body. Just like I mentioned for laptop computers, it's going to rest on the desk. It's going to rest somewhere because your body wants that support for the weight of the upper body. And in terms of chair height, you basically want your armrest kind of in line or slightly higher than the keyboard. And once again, if your feet aren't flat on the floor, then you're going to use a footrest. Now, recognizing that many of us are working from home, You may not have all the equipment available to you, but once again, if you are working a lot at home, you want to think about some equipment that you may need, but there are some things that you can do at home as well without all of the bells and whistles as well. So in terms of your chair, definitely don't choose a couch. As much as that might be tempting and that might seem comfortable at first, it's not a good ergonomic setup at all. So choose a chair, not a couch. Sit all the way back with a neutral spine and the shoulders relaxed, and you can use a pillow or rolled up towel on your low back to provide that lumbar support that we were talking about earlier. Any additional things, you still want to maintain all of the same things that we talked about, the space and the footrest. One thing that isn't shown in this picture is that if you're sitting too low relative to your work height, you could put a cushion on top of your chair and sit on that cushion. And we're going to be talking about laptop risers in just a second, and laptops. So we'll go forward. But basically, you really do want to make sure your goal is to basically have your table or your work surface at or just below elbow height. Okay. So in terms of the monitor, we talked about where the top of the screen needs to be, basically at eye level. Now, if you have bifocals or progressives, then you actually want your screen to be a little bit lower so that you're not tilting your neck to see the monitor. This is a terrible position. That poking chin position puts a lot of strain on the neck. So typically the monitor needs to go down lower. If you are using dual monitors, then it depends on how frequently you use each monitor. If you're using each monitor about the same amount of time, then you basically want to center both monitors, like so the inside edges of each monitor are going to be centered with your body. If you're using one monitor primarily and then the other one just sort of as a reference sort of screen, then you should position that main primary monitor directly in front of you and then the other one off to the side. The other thing to consider is the position of windows. Windows can cause a lot of glare onto the computer screen, which can add to eye strain. So you want to be at right angles to windows, and you may also, in addition to that, need to use blinds or etc. But you don't want to be facing directly a window, or you don't want a window directly behind you either. And as a general rule for eye strain, we call it the 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds as a general rule. Okay, laptop computers, we talked about the risks of laptop computers earlier. So ideally, what you want to be able to do if you are working off of a laptop primarily, you really want to see if you can get an external monitor, keyboard, and mouse. So that way, on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side there, you'll see a picture where the laptop is raised up so that it's at the right height for your head and neck alignment. Okay, and then you've got that external monitor and keyboard to make sure that you've got good alignment for your shoulders, elbows, hands, and wrists. So your laptop, you could also be used as a second screen if you had that external monitor. Now, that is the most effective, and that's going to be your ideal scenario. Now, what happens if you don't have an external monitor? Then what you would do is you would elevate that laptop on books or a laptop stand, but then you would still use your keyboard, an external keyboard and mouse. So that's still very, very important. Now, if you didn't have any equipment, I wouldn't recommend this if you're working on your computer for long periods of time. But some things that you can do, especially if you're working for short periods of time, you can tilt your monitor, you can put a cushion on your lap to raise the keyboard up a little bit, and then movement breaks and exercises become even more critical in this, which we will talk about shortly. When we talk about the keyboard, some additional considerations here. If you don't have armrests, you may consider using a gel wrist rest, or more accurately termed, it should be called a palm rest, because we really don't want to be resting anything directly on our wrists, but rather the lower part of our palms. And once again, ideally, if you have armrest, that would be the best case scenario, but a wrist rest would certainly help minimize the contact stress of resting your hand and your wrist on the hard desktop. Okay. The other thing you want to consider is lowering your keyboard feet. Okay, you'll see on the left-hand side there on the picture, a lot of people will have those feet raised up. And what this does is it puts your wrists in extension, which is an awkward position. The other thing that we often see is a lot of people will have the natural tendency, and I think this is a normal tendency, we want to center our body with the whole keyboard, okay? And so what that does is it puts that right wrist in particular in an awkward position. You can see that picture where it says off-center keyboard position. And then on the bottom right-hand corner in the picture there, if you center just the alphanumeric keypad part of your keyboard, so not the numbers part, but just the alphanumeric keypad, that's what you want to center with your body to make sure that your wrists are nice and straight. Now, you also have to consider if you're doing a lot of mouse work, you might have to also find a little bit of a compromise position between the two. Okay, when you're thinking about mouse work, what's really important, we don't see it as often, but I still see it quite a bit where the mouse is positioned on a different level than the keyboard, and that really results in a lot of reaching. As you can see in the picture on the left-hand side, the elbow is extended, the wrist extended, and then you have the tendency to lean forward unsupported. So that puts a lot of strain on the shoulders, on the wrists, on the back. So you really want your elbows to remain close when you're using the mouse. And think about resting your palm and fingers lightly on the mouse rather than sometimes we have a death grip on the mouse. And so just try and relax the best that you can and use keyboard shortcuts when you can as well. Okay, quickly on document holders, you see that picture on the left-hand side. You want to definitely avoid putting reference documents flat on the desk because this basically results in combined neck flexion and rotation, and that can cause a lot of neck strain. And so if you're doing data entry or you're referencing a lot of paper documents, you really want to raise an angle, even if it's just a little bit. And you can either position it in line, so in between your keyboard and your monitor, or you can position it off to the side of the monitor, just depending on what type of tasks you're doing. For example, if you're writing on it, then you're probably going to want to have it in line. And just to keep in mind as well that you don't actually need fancy equipment to angle your paper documents. You can use an empty binder in between your monitor and your keyboard as well. Okay, we've talked about reaching. Now, this I really want to hit home because no matter how perfectly you're set up, our bodies were designed to move. Okay, muscle movement basically serves as a pump. It'll improve blood flow. It's going to nourish the intervertebral discs. And it's very therapeutic for the joints and the synovial fluid to sort of reduce stiffness in the joints. And so movement is really, really important no matter how perfectly you're set up. Once again, our bodies were designed to move. The idea is not that we stay in any one position for any prolonged period of time. So taking your movement breaks becomes really, really critical. And as a general rule, you want to try and accumulate at least 5 to 10 minutes every hour. That doesn't mean that you have to stop working altogether. That could mean that you stand on the to take a phone call. That could mean that you stand during a meeting. So there's lots of different things that you can do, but it really is important to take those breaks. And the less ideal that your setup is, the more important that this becomes. And if you need to, set a timer. And then finally, I do want to talk about a little bit about reversing ways that you can also reverse the stress by doing some office exercises. So I won't get into all of these exercises, but these stretching exercises are specifically designed to look at what muscles are commonly in a shortened position when we are in a seated position. And so we want to try and reverse that stress. by doing some stretching exercises and some movement breaks as well. And there is a resource on our website that reviews all of the office exercises that would be suitable for this. Now, I recognize that I am running out of time, so I really did just want to quickly touch on some of the psychosocial risk factors. We don't really talk about those when it comes to computer workstation ergonomics, but I did want to touch on this because there is more research being done on this, and it is included in the new CSA standard for psychological health and safety on workplace factors. It's included in that is the protection of physical safety. So I don't think that I would need to convince anybody that there's a connection between physical and psychological as well. But some additional psychosocial risk factors that you want to be aware of that could also, that we're noticing can also lead to MS, like musculoskeletal injuries, is the amount of social support you have from your manager and your colleagues, just the overall safety culture and climate and your work style, mental workload, effort reward imbalances, work-pace job demands, and job satisfaction. And on that, I will just touch on a couple of additional strategies, especially if you're working at home. This was a game changer for me in particular. I late in the game decided to set up my workstation in a very specific area, work location in my home. I'm lucky I had a spare bedroom that I could set it up in, but it was a big game changer for me in terms of separating that work from personal life. So don't underestimate that. So if you have the ability to have a specific work location area where you can set yourself up, I highly recommend that you do that. It's also important that you try and incorporate regular work schedules. So, for example, a morning startup routine, shower, get dressed, eat, have breakfast, do all those things that you normally would. Even just a simple change of clothes can make a big difference. It's okay to stay in your PJs every once in a while, and I know we all love doing that, but it is important to kind of just get yourself ready for work. And the same thing with evening shutdown routines. Same sort of idea. Change your clothes, go for a walk, do some exercises, do something to switch gears and to indicate to you that your work time is done now. And obviously, just communicating often with your team members. So rather than just relying solely on emails, phone, or Teams meetings are a much better option in terms of keeping that connection. Just really quickly, we have a number of resources available. There is a shared health resource, and we also have some resources on our website that basically goes through everything I went through in a lot more detail. We've got OSH computer workstation bulletins. We also have our office exercise sheets, and we also have a webinar on office ergonomics that is very beneficial as well. All right, and then I'll leave that to questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that presentation, Sylvia. It was really informative, and I think a lot of really good information, and I appreciated it. A lot of it was very practical information, being able to use items around your house, and not everybody has a lot of that equipment that that you noted there. So so to be able to find some practical ideas around the house, I think was really beneficial. In terms of questions, we've had a couple pop up here. Someone was asking just about how they would uh, send an email to info. It was from a shared health email. So if you want to send an email to shared health, info@sharedhealthmb.ca, that would be a starting point, and we could direct you to the proper location to book some support. We also had a question just wondering if we could get a copy of the presentation, provided you have no concerns. Sylvia, I was just saying we had another question asking if they could get a copy of the presentation, And I was just going to say, as long as you have no concerns with sharing it, we could place that on the website where we'll also host the video.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll give you an update. I'll give you
If
my
that's
most
no
updated
concerns with that.
presentation on that. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, so we do have a little bit of time left for questions here. So if anyone else does have a question, please enter it into the question pane. I'll note, as I said previously, we will be posting this video to the health providers page, and again, you can find the link to that in the chat. I have a link placed in there, so that's where you'll find the recording, and then we'll also place a link there on where you can find the PowerPoint presentation. I was just curious, Sylvia, and since obviously, the pandemic, a lot more people are working from home. Are as a result of that, are you seeing more of those types of MSI injuries, and is that becoming more of a concern?
That is actually a really great question, and we haven't really. I'd have to look at the number of requests for ergonomic assessment, so I really don't know the answer to that. But I myself haven't noticed any increase or anything like that.
Mhm.
But again, I'd have to look at whether or not we're getting more requests. I'm really not sure.
Terrific. Great. We had someone note, thank you for the presentation. They had adjusted their workstation as you went along. So
Oh,
some
great.
good information.
Good.
So they were able to put it into use right away. We had another question
Excellent.
regarding chairs. If a staff is requesting a specific type of chair or desk when working within the office, do they need to get an assessment first?
So, I mean, it is recommended because what we often find is chairs are ordered, and if you don't know what to look for, and it needs to make sure that it fits you properly, and then depending on your work tasks, we want to make sure it has the features that you need. And in our experience, what happens is sometimes chairs will be purchased, and then there's ongoing issues that may or may not be related to the chair. And then we come and we do an ergonomic assessment, and we find that the chair is not the right chair for that person. And as you know, chairs are not cheap. So
No,
so we
no.
do recommend that if you're getting, particularly if you're having issues, right? Like if you're experiencing symptoms in particular, absolutely, you should request an assessment. Make sure that you have the right chair.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. We had a couple questions regarding how to go about asking for an assessment, and I don't know if it's a different process between WRHA and Shared Health, but um, as I mentioned, you could maybe send an email to info at info@sharedhealthmb.ca from a shared health perspective, and as I said, we could direct you to the proper location. And then Sylvia, for anyone who is with the WRHA, if maybe you wanted to touch on that process.
Yeah, sure. And the process is the same to my knowledge, at least it hasn't changed. But you can request an ergonomic assessment by emailing. Is my resource slide on right now?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so at the bottom, there's an email. You basically email WRHA ergo at wrha.mb.ca to
Great.
request an ergonomic assessment. However, what we do say is first and foremost, you need to go to your manager to let them know that you're having difficulties, and then we request that the manager submit the request, because it's really important that your manager knows if you're having any sort of difficulties in the workplace at all.
Great. That's a good idea. Terrific. I'm not seeing any other
Yeah.
questions at the moment, but if anyone does have, oh, we do have another one. Can we post a link to the site where the presentation will be available? Yes, so that you can find in the chat section. Again, if you just look into the chat, but I can just touch on the link. It's healthproviders.sharedhealthmb.ca/services/mental health and addictions and booster session. So easy part is if you were just to go to the health providers page, looking under services and then mental health and addictions, you'll see a menu there where you can access the booster session. So that's another method to go about that. And so in terms of, we had a couple of other questions just regarding assessments. As I said, you can email info@sharedhealthmb.ca, and we'll do our best to direct you to the proper people. So just so we can make sure we're providing that information correctly. And we had a question regarding if assessments are done for home. I don't know if you have any information on that, Sylvia.
That's a great question. So we haven't done a lot of home assessments. We find that basically if we assist somebody sort of from the office or we do something virtual, we go through some stuff together. For the most part, we find that adequate. Now, in saying that, we would have to sort of evaluate on a case-by-case basis whether or not we felt an evaluation in the actual home would be warranted or indicated. But as a standard process, I would say we don't do home assessments, but we can still sort of help out in other ways. And then if absolutely needed, we would, like I said, assess that on a case-by-case basis.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment, so we'll just put out a last call for questions. And while we're doing that, I'll just note that we have another session coming up in February. That's on sleep. The topic is sleep and our mental health. So I would encourage you to go again to the Shared Health health providers page and to the booster page there where I had mentioned. That's where you'll be able to find out any information about upcoming sessions, and we do have a link to the sleep and mental health session, and you can register through that. And there's a little bit of information about who the presenter is and what they'll be discussing as well. So again, that was at that same link that is in the chat section. Okay, so not seeing any new questions at the moment, so we'll just close things out there. I just want to say again, thank you very much, Sylvia, for the presentation today. A lot of really good, like I said, a lot of really great practical information. I think that people can, obviously, as some people noted, that you can put into action right away. So I think it'll be very helpful for many. And so again, yeah, thank you for that, and thank you to everybody who was able to join us today and attend. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you.